as a school leader, one of the things that I'm often gripped with is the level of trust that is put into the school. Parenting is incredibly personal work. It it's the most personal thing that we do in some ways, and we take this private arena of family life, and students come to school and they bring their context with them into the classroom, and I, as a school leader, am to steward that.
This is the Doc School Leader Podcast, and I'm your host, Kyler Martin. We're here to sustain the vision and support the work of faithful, courageous school leaders. We're dedicated to renewal and growth. Transformative schools need effective leadership, and effective leaders are formed through patient training. In the last episode, we heard from Gerald Miller about the central role of the family. For this special question and response feature, I sat down with Gerald Miller, the administrator at Faith Builders Christian School, for a related conversation about the role school leaders have in growing healthy families in their communities. We talked about the current parenting scene, tried to paint a picture of what could be, and thought about the opportunities before us. Just to set us up for this conversation and get a couple things for us to think about. Jesus likened people to different kinds of soil. Schools have the privilege of helping to tend and keep this most precious of resources, but it is our students' homes that have perhaps the most profound effect on the quality of the soil for students. It's the work of God in the world to create good ground and make it fruitful. God is at work by bringing together his great family through Jesus in the church. Our biological families are essential miniatures of that larger work, and effective schools then serve families by aiding in the preparation of good ground in their children and in cultivating a good planting for a future of fruitfulness. Families and schools stand or fall together, depending on how they do in that shared stewardship. Each has the potential to be either a champion or opponent for the other. We're delving into this topic on the podcast because it's vitally important and often complicated. Messy, as we often say. How do teachers and school leaders avoid trespassing on the territory of the parents? What do we do with all the knowledge we gain about families and parents at school? What do we do with problems in the home that often feel outside of our reach? How do we hear and respond to the concerns, the frustrations, the aims of parents? In short, how can you, as a school leader, work to care for the families in your community? What is your role in growing healthy homes?
I do think that's really important for parents, for families, for schools, for churches to see this as a collaborative effort, an effort to help each other along. That no entity has all the answers, but we actually work together for the flourishing of each student. And so, in my mind, I'm always thinking about, or I'm trying to about, what does this student need to flourish, and the context in which a child flourishes, the good ground, as you talk about it, is really important. And so, how can the school work with families to enable that child to flourish and be a part of the story that God was hoping to write for that child?
I'm wondering if some of the reason that this can get messy is because our lives tend to be very independent today.
and we go about being told that if we only have the right resources and tools, we can become fully independent, and that's the good life today. And the if we're assuming that family building happens best in community, that and that it's this revealing of what's most personal to us, it calls for kind of interdependence that we're not really prepared for in most of the rest of our lives. Anything to say to that?
Yeah, that's really interesting the way you frame that. So, one of the ways in which I see this is that, in the Old Testament, the family was at the core of everything, and so tribes, the tribe of Levi and Dan and Issachar, and you have tribes. It's tribal, very family oriented, and God gives very distinct instructions to fathers and how to train children, and it's all appropriate. It's right. In that era, it's family. Well, when Jesus comes, he actually says, families are important, but it's the church, the bride of Christ that I'm here for. And that families, there was a transition when Jesus came to saying our family is not only our blood family, our family is the church. It's our brotherhood. It's our community. And I feel like sometimes we've not fully transitioned over to the New Testament picture of families. Families should not be an end in themselves. Families are for the purpose of building the kingdom through the local body of believers, through the church. And so I would tend to care a whole lot about how that families aren't an end in themselves. They are moving us toward building what God is doing in the world. And so we are interdependent. It does require us to work with each other. And God designed it that way. God has a lot more instructions in the New Testament through Paul's writings and other writers about church life than he talks about family life. There's not that much in the New Testament. It's sort of assumed, I think, that parenting and child training and all those kinds of things are just, it's what we should be doing. It's par for the course, but its purpose is for the bride of Christ. It's for the church. It's for the kingdom. And so interdependence becomes incredibly important. I would also say that, in my experience raising 5 children, I also I think I've always recognized at a pretty deep level that I do not have by myself what it takes to raise my children well. I actually need the school. I need the church. I need others around me. And so I think it's important for school leaders to also be really aware of that we don't have the answers either. That it requires conversation. It requires us to be looking out for the family and for us to be connected to the church and for us all to work together, it seems to me, in this incredibly wonderful enterprise of raising children. The kingdom really is built on bringing people into that kingdom and them going out and working. And so raising children, we are a hopeful people. We keep having children. And there's a reason for it. And it's embedded into who we are. But we weren't meant to do it by ourselves. And I think, so you mentioned a bit earlier, we have the power to sabotage family life as a school. And we have the power to bless and grow. And it is really important, I think, that we steward this very carefully because of the potential of it.
It's possible, but not ideal, to build a church of individuals. Individuals were meant to be primarily formed through their family, at least as children and young people. And I think some of also what's in the background of our conversation here is that we're trying to build the church, but we're struggling as families in places, or where we struggle as families, the church suffers and the school suffers, because individuals they still need their individual family. It's not that the church somehow replaces the organization of the family.
I would agree with that. So the family is the core unit. It is such a vital part. It's a vital part of civilization. You have to have families that work for civilization to work. And that's, I think, historically accurate. I think we see that as the family breaks down, church doesn't work, school doesn't, country doesn't. All those things become, I think, evident and reality. So the family is at the core. My concern primarily is that we don't disconnect the family from its purpose of serving in the kingdom through the local body. That we don't just raise our children and make our life easy. They'll all be right around us, and we'll have this idyllic life with 35 acres of land with pastures and sheep and whatever. But that we are warriors in the kingdom, and that we're raising people, thoughtful people who can communicate clearly and who know how to love well. Lovers of God, lovers of people. That's our ultimate gain. That is our ultimate purpose, and that how we work as families tells us how it's going to go, how well we're going to do there. Families should be able to become more than what they are. They should be able to grow as family units, not just as individuals, but also as families. And the church helps that. That's also where I think the school can come right into play as well.
And I think maybe a way to summarize why we're doing this is because it's easy to think in the church and in the school that we're serving individuals.
Yes.
And we're saying that it really matters that the school thinks about itself as serving and building the family as a vital unit of the church and as a civilization. But it's harder to serve families and individuals because there's more people involved. And we do need to respect the family's prerogatives and its territory. So we can't replace them ever. We can only serve them and enable them to do. And I think about this even in situations of foster care or adoption. You can give a child a good home, but you can never replace their family and their biological family. And and maybe there's some analogies for schools that we can never replace what the family offers to a child. At best, can enable and support them. But what are you hearing from families today?
Well,
Parents.
as I've gotten a little bit older here, I'm getting a different set of questions probably than I used to, which is probably appropriate, of course. What I find is really compelling to me and a positive thing. Parenting is so personal. How our children live and work and are and play, and it's personal. It's a reflection. There's no way to get around it. And I've been blessed to be in schools for 30 years because I think it's helped me to understand some of those dynamics and what goes into family life. I feel blessed to have been in a school working with children and families to try to and be able to understand what is it, what are the components that help raise healthy, flourishing families. So for me, first of all, it's a huge privilege. And the biggest thing that I'm appreciating, in fact, I'm meeting with a family from church next week, Kathy and I are. They have questions about their about their son and want to know how to help him grow. Well, 30 years ago, Kyler, I wouldn't have done that. Sat down with somebody and said, "Help me understand my child. How do I help? How do I raise this child?" And he has probably some additional needs, and so the one thing I'm really noticing is parents are hungry. Parents want help. Parents, there's a sense of being overwhelmed with the work of parenting, and some of that has to do, I think, with mental health and the levels of anxiety that our people are experiencing. There's a lot of anxiety about getting it right and am I doing it good enough, and of course we have just our current culture and what it brings us, and it's just created and what the writers called an anxious generation. And so we have that's one of the things we're seeing is some anxiety about all this, and they're also overwhelmed, and they're also hungry. And so it's kind of a great combination. Like, this is not a hopeless situation. What becomes hopeless to me as a school leader is when we're anxious and we have all these resources, but we don't know how to kind of work through that and sort through it and pull what's good and leave the rest and not feel obligated. Like, I must do all of this to be a good parent. It's not there. We aren't ever going to get it all right. That's not the point. If we weren't hungry alongside that, we'd be in trouble. So I'm really enjoying this little shift, I think, where there's openness. There can be discussion about parenting. Part of it is there has been so much written about it. And in fact, it's ironic, isn't it? We're here on a podcast because there is so much out there for us to access, but it is becoming difficult to sort through what is actually helpful, what is simply pop culture, latest ideas, what's biblical, what's actually true, what is time tested, what works in parenting, what is grounded in the way things really are.
So now you're going to tell us.
Right. Sure.
But so maybe we overcomplicated parenting, and if so, I guess it's maybe characteristic of a lot of what we do. We were meant to be families. We were meant for family life. It's native to us, and yet we tend to go our own way and we've made a lot of problems out of this thing that we were meant to enjoy and thrive in, and we can't fix our own problems. We need God's grace, who made families is a wonderful thing. What do you have to say to the question of where can we start to find a simplicity and a source of confidence in parenting, clear from the scriptures? Are there a couple of big ideas, especially that come into play at school and in the ways families can equip their children to do well in the world?
Yeah, that's good. In some ways, family life is really about living life together. And so, routines and doing some things regularly, giving children the security and the belonging that they need. There's things that parents need to do, there's things that children need to do, and these things all move into the school. And so I think we have overcomplicated it. There are so many small things one can do, but I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that family life is living together, doing life together, praying together, eating together. It's making fence together. It's gardening together. It's taking walks together. It's helping mom make supper to get. It was meant to be a shared experience. It's living life together, and as we live life together, we're able to talk, and problems come up because we live in a fallen, broken world, and our children are fallen and broken, and it gives us opportunity to train and develop our children as we go about our work. In one sense, that's what that is. The problem is it's not that simple, because children are all different. They're unique. They have different gifts. There's no recipe or template that we can just place a child into. Well, when a child then comes to school, all of that living life together sort of comes to bear into the school. Well, how does from a school leader perspective then, I would tend to say there's two things that are the most important for parents to work on as we come into the school. I think there's ways for the school to help raise that standard. Instead of asking so much of families in so many different ways and pushing on different areas of child training, suppose we just boil it down to two things. And for me, in my experience, the two things that families should get right, and I know that we'll never get it right, okay? But two fairly simple goals that can permeate family life, I think, is teaching children to obey and to respect. And that sounds too simplistic, and I know people want to argue with that a little bit because we are complex human beings, but here again, I think the overcomplication of life maybe should call us to step back and actually raise the ideas of if we get two things kind of right, a lot of good will happen. We have good ground to work with, good soil to work with. If a child can obey a teacher, a principal, a teacher's aide, the tutor, if they can respect the teacher, the aide, the tutor, respect each other, the students, if that's embedded, if that soil is there can be a tremendous amount of flourishing. A school can come alongside the family and have things to work with. I feel like if those two pieces are in place, we have so much to work with. The other thing I would just say is that when we work with parents, when those things are in place, it's easy to work with parents because parents come with a certain mindset. They also want their children to be able to do what they're asked to do and to respect other people. And when that's embedded, those children get that from their parents, from that training. That means parents are in the same position. They're also a respectful group. They also want to do what's right. And so it becomes win-win all the way around. Now we can actually talk. It's okay for me to say, hey, as a father, have you thought about this? And we can collaborate. We can be a team about this. We can actually work together because there's sort of mutual respect. I'm not coming in as a school leader and attacking you as the dad. I'm saying, hey, I noticed something. I think you want to know that. I tell my teachers, when in doubt, say something. Parents want to know. I remember the first time I sent a child to school. And I realized that first day of school why parents are terrified of sending their children off that first day. Some are really grateful for the opportunity, but I tell you, I felt something. I'm the principal. I'm there every day. I'm the luckiest dad in the school, and yet I feel this, will these teachers do okay with my son? Will it work? Will they take care of him? Can I trust them? I had feelings and emotions I had no idea that I would have. And I've often thought about that. That is how parents come. There's a certain sense of personal. My life is now open to these teachers. And so as a school leader, to bear in mind that we are in a collaborative space in the school. We are not telling parents what to do, but we're also calling parents where needs be. But we're also telling them, we're letting them know before we have massive problems. We're talking. I think it doesn't have to be so incredibly complex as what we make it. I think the fundamentals that have always been in place are still helpful. They're still there. It's, I think the scriptures call us to obey and respect. I think that becomes pretty clear about what children should do in Ephesians, and we understand loving God, loving people, what that means, and we're trying to train toward that. And then as schools, churches, and homes, we're communicating, we're collaborating, we're alerting each other. And I cannot tell you how many times, should we say something or shouldn't we? Should we say something? Shouldn't we? Let's say something to the parent. And immediately the parent says, oh, we're struggling with the same thing at home. Absolutely. What are you doing? Well, we're not sure what to. Well, this is what I'm doing, but it's not working. Oh, well, we tried this and it seemed to work, or it's not working either. Let's figure out a plan. And you begin to work on this together. To me, that is where the schools are coming alongside families, and we are helping each other. We're collaborating, we're working together. We're not saying what has to be, but we're also giving insight because the child is removed from their family and they're in a different context. In education, we talk about decontextualization, and that is we offer, it's usually in terms of teaching content. We offer content one way and then come back around in a different way, a different context, and teach it again, or try to understand if students actually understood the concept in a different context. We decontextualize to help a student make the connections. Well, in some ways, that's what you're doing as a parent. You're sending your child, they're in a different environment, different context, different pressures. And so the school hopefully has the trust of the parents, and that we also, as school leaders, and teachers, we trust our parents, but they're in a different space, so different issues arise. But yet they're almost always the same issues as well. So there's this little interplay between, wow, where'd that come from? And, oh, I deal with this all the time at home. We don't know what to do anymore. And I've been there so many times. It's such a blessing when I reflect, because the number of times parents have said, this is exactly what we are dealing with at home. Thank you for talking about this. Let's talk about it. Let's help me. That is such a blessing.
And I'm trying to make a couple connections here. So on the one hand, I'm hearing you say that, or we started out by saying, we've overcomplicated parenting, that's what we're meant for. And that it's intimidating and fearful for a parent to send their child to school and be exposed in that way, and also for a teacher to offer their perspective and to be open with parents about what they're experiencing at school. So we have this complication, we have this fear, lack of trust. Also talked about a bit of a bedrock, or the basis for how we understand the goals of parenting and leading children as being based around respect and obedience. And I think I'm hearing you say that if we can agree on simple common goals, that we then have a basis for overcoming that fear and mistrust, or building trust between the different parties responsible for children, school, church, and parents, that we know we all care about respect and obedience. We can talk about that. We can work at that. And I think we're talking about a couple of different things here, and you're giving us examples of ways that this can work well, where through children having different contexts, they can actually learn concepts much more deeply than they could if they only had one context. But that only happens when the people responsible in those different settings can talk and compare notes and be able to lead responsibly in their own spheres. So, but maybe one of the ways I'm hearing this is that this can cut through some of the tension of things that can tend to be in the spotlight, like, one child's watched that film, oh dear, and this child's listened to this music at home, and they're obsessed with this over there. What do we do about all of that? Those things matter. They're important. But I think I'm hearing you say that respect and obedience can help to cut through some of those things that can make this tense, where we don't all have the same practices and expectations as families and schools. Maybe this helps to unify us, give us a place to start, and open communication between parties.
Yeah, that's well said. I think about something that one of my staff members told me here some time ago. They said, one of the shifts that they see is that as individual families, we're less tuned into how other families do things as we become more individualistic. There's not that awareness of me not doing something or not talking about something or talking about the music or whatever, even if there is some differences or whatever. And we're not tuned in and kind of respectful. So I think about those kinds of things in relation to what you're saying, in that because respect is so fundamental to human flourishing life, it does give us language that's shared, that have you thought about how you're doing things in your home, how not other families may not do it this way, and could you would you consider working with your child about the kinds of conversations or the kinds of things that when you invite them over after school, the kinds of things you do even as a matter of respect. We've lost some of that as we've become a little more individualistic. And we all have our ideas, and those are good ideas, and yet it doesn't always work out well. And so I think another place here then is that school is an opportunity for us to become more tuned into each other. Again, because school's kind of a daily thing. We go to church once, maybe twice a week. For a couple hours. At school, it's 6 hours a day. That's the power. Both ends of the spectrum of a school is that we have a lot of time with children, and a lot of things come up that'll never come up in church life.
So I think I'm hearing you say that this is not just a question of helping children to respect one another and respect their authorities, but also maybe for families to learn to respect one another through the connection that a school connections maybe too passive a word, the confrontation even between other families that happen at school.
Yeah, and I think it's fertile ground to keep working on things, to keep growing, to becoming better kingdom citizens. There is just enough interaction, and parents, because parenting is personal, children are personal to parents. Parents sometimes even will sit on something. They won't talk to a teacher or a principal about something because, well, they don't want to be that parent who's always, complaining. But on the other hand, maybe it would be good if they did say something. And we'd help navigate that. We could say, well, our suggestion is that you would talk directly here to this parent. This is your concern. That's a valid concern from our vantage point. We don't necessarily do the work of the parent, but we encourage something here. And so it's a way for all of us to grow. And then, by the way, staff does not, they don't love that part of school necessarily. We always feel that the dangerous nature of treading on family life, and yet it's necessary to talk to to families. And so it's not the most loved part of school where I have to talk to a parent about their child or about this issue between two of them or whatever. But it's an important part of growing. If we're going to take seriously the vision for church and the kingdom as families, then we have to keep working with each other. We're going to keep growing. We got to keep growing. We have to do the right things. And in some ways, I would say that as a school, we are obligated. One of the things that I realize is that the schools know things that churches don't. And so, because it's 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for 180-ish days. And the sheer volume of time allows things to crop up and show up. And I find it helpful for us to think about school, not just families and the school together, but families, schools, and churches working together. And so I think it's appropriate for a school to position themselves with parents and the community that we work together with church leaders too. Work with families. We also work with church leaders. And I appreciate when I'm able to sit down and talk with pastors about families, or they come to me and say, what are you seeing here? I think that's collaborative. It's very sensitive. You must hold it incredibly carefully. But I feel like it has borne fruit over the years, is how I would describe it, to have church leaders invested in the school too, where they understand there's things going on in the school they won't know any other way. Sure, you have youth group, but what about the ages 6 to 16? And so there's a lot of life that happens from 6 to 16. There's a lot of formation, and there's often a lot of patterns that emerge. And so I found it a blessing to be to have pastors around me that care about trends. And that's one of the things, I might not even get all that specific about a certain family, but trends that we see. One of the more recent trends is gentle parenting. And so what does that mean? And of course, gentle parenting is in reaction to experiences from the past, and culturally we're always yo-yoing between the ditches. But I think being able to offer trends, we're seeing this now, or really see this is positive. You know, you really, this is a great opportunity for the church because there's some really good stuff right now. There's a trend here. And so it's not just about negative trends, but I do hear pastors liking to understand what I see in general in trends, because things come and go and student bodies change and people move out and others move in. And so the student body is never static. It's always moving. And so by staying connected to church leaders, I feel like that's a significant way to really to bless a church. But I just recognize how incredibly careful we must be with that trust. And so we must, I think we have to create the expectation then of the fact that we do talk. Like, it can't be a surprise to parents. Shouldn't be surprised. You mean you talk about basic trends in school? Yes, I do. I surely do. and so I think it's important that we have laid those things out, that we work with churches, that we're not isolated, just like families shouldn't be isolated from the community.
I think this is a good place to transition into just summarizing some of the applications. We could ask, so what then can schools do to help grow healthy families? There's so many things we could explore here. and a lot of unanswered questions about how you build a culture, how you build the trust. What are the things that enable schools to grow healthy families? But I'm hearing you come back often to communication between these parties, and trust building, and the school. I'm hearing you say things like school leaders have a role in encouraging and even maybe sometimes pushing staff a bit to engage with this, for school leaders to embrace the challenge of bringing families together, and not being willing just to stop at the level of helping each family do well in itself, but to try to bring families together. And you've added a layer here with churches of building relationships between school leaders and church leaders, but also helping families to see the potential of working together with their church leaders. I'm curious what else you have to say about how can we start to apply this?
Yeah, that's good, and of course it is endless. There's so many ways, and many of them small. There's not a silver bullet here. I think it's the script idea, line upon line, precept upon precept. There's a sense of which we build this. We first embody, for instance, as a school leader, I embody respect and obedience. I first must be that, for instance. I must come under my school board. I am a servant of theirs and a servant of the church. I am to respect. I am to offer great respect of my staff, to my staff, for my staff. I embody what I am looking for. And one of the ways in which I think we can continue to grow families is by schools developing a really strong, positive culture that is built on the backs of long-term teachers. And so a place for even school leaders, this seems a little bit off the beaten path maybe, but school leaders should be, and boards should be looking carefully. How can we have more long-term teachers? Because the trust factor is so significant when you're dealing with families. And if I could just say it this way, when you have 18-year-old teachers needing to work with family situations, it's a tough place to put an 18-year-old, really tough. Mm-hmm. And that trust is just not there. And I just know from experience that even when you're a 20-year teacher, and maybe you don't even have children, you feel very sensitive to how you talk about something that is related, or that kind of comes back to the way a child has been parented. And so there's so many ways in which we can work at this thing, but I'd also want to offer this long-term, bigger picture, saying that we get there partly, or maybe mostly, through teaching staff that is committed and engaged to these ideas, to the idea of communication, of partnering, of being a part of something that's bigger than themselves. And I feel like that's actually, while it feels tangential, it does feel important to me, because trust is so important in working through issues at school. Parents have so much valuable information, and I think keeping the communication lines open. I sometimes write a note to parents. Sometimes it's in a weekly letter I send that I talk about an area of life that I think is important. And I know not everyone reads it, and we always have those issues. School leaders all know that, but it's still an effort to raise certain things to the consciousness of parents is a way to help them. It's not scolding, it's just offering perspective or a vision. It's not being negative, but here's what could be. Those are all, you see, there's so many small building blocks that come into this team effort of raising children. for the Lord. And so becoming a school that grows healthy families just really has a lot to do with building key relationships. That's teacher-student relationships. That's teacher-principal. That's teacher-family. It could even be teacher-pastor. It's school leaders that are building relationships with parents and church leaders and their team. All of these building key relationships, I think, are really important. I've found that working with church leaders helps me as a school leader to not carry all the weight by myself. And as school leaders, sometimes we feel like the weight of the world hangs on us. But so do other people. So do church leaders. So why don't we actually try to share that weight a little bit? And I think that's a place where we can keep growing. I think we have to recognize that parents are all different. We're unique. They have different expectations. They had their own. Every parent was parented themselves in a certain way. It's shaped the way they parent their children. So there has to be some give and take. There has to be some opportunity for a little bit of difference. At the same time, not giving up on the core ideas, what it means to be a family. And then maybe finally I'd just say that that school leaders ought to work pretty hard at enabling their teachers, helping their teaching staff know what to say, when to say it, as we run into issues. I love that staff I'm currently part of comes to me with their questions. What do you think we should do here? They already know. They know. But it's kind of nice to talk about it and to get a little bit of language. And often I have context as a school leader that they do not have as the teacher. I've been working with the family for 20 years. And that's just not going to be helpful. Let that one go. That's an anomaly. Or, you know what? I think they would want to know that. This family definitely wants to know about that. This family won't know what to do with it. If we're going to say this, let's offer a way forward here. Let's suggest something. And so that enabling teachers to participate in family life is a big part of what school leaders, I think, ought to be doing. To allow teachers to be transparent with parents. We don't have to say everything. There's plenty that we don't say, and that's not necessary. But there are certain things that I think is really helpful. It's part of brotherhood. It's a part of seeing life together as a community, seeing the value that the core unit of a family brings, and how it shapes the church, and how the school can be at some level at the heart of a church, even, because we're all in this business of raising up children for the Lord, for the future of the church. And the New Testament offers a lot of vision and hope for the future of the church. And it puts a lot of stock in discipleship and raising up people to do the work of the kingdom, to do what God has said we ought to be doing, and to offer a context in which children flourish, families flourish, and churches flourish. To me, that's the vision of a school. It's not school just to be a school. It's a school that serves the church by serving its families. And I would hope that school leaders, while we are primarily in the arena of academics, there's a lot of living that happens around academics, and that we don't forget to be an advocate for healthy families, for the core of what makes us who we are. Anabaptists have been gifted a heritage of a lot of faithful parenting over the years. We don't get it right. Children make decisions that we prefer they wouldn't make. This is all true. But we've been given certain things that we take for granted, and they must be nurtured or the culture presses in on us. The ideas of limiting screen time, which is taking hold, and younger people are doing way better than the middle-aged crowd here. They're taking hold of the issues of too much screen time for children. My own grandchildren don't get on screens ever, unless they're on the video call with grandpas. But there's an understanding of wait, here's a line. We don't want to cross this. It's for the good of our family. They're willing to do that. School should be helping them. That is a tremendous vision. All the research that you'd ever want to read about is out there on screens. Well, parents are actually taking that seriously, unlike my generation who said, yeah, it's probably a problem, but we don't know how to get around that, so we're just going to succumb. That's not what this generation's doing. Our young families are in a position where they want to hear, they're open, and there's a bit of a vacuum. There's a desire for help, and if schools can step in and help, instead of having all the podcasters and all of the resources online and all the books, how about we make this a human thing again, where we are working together to enable flourishing families? That would be my ultimate goal in school life.
That's compelling, Gerald. Maybe we've covered this. I wonder if there's one more brief question here that you need to address. I think we're calling school leaders to see as essential to their role being an advocate for families. And I wonder if that's sometimes lost a bit in the hiring and even the way school leaders, the way we think about our work, that we tend to put our academic preparation, because we're often teaching, our capacity for leading the team and dealing with problems and handling policy, that can crowd out sometimes what's actually emerging as an essential piece of school leadership is advocating for families. And I'm wondering if we could just come back and highlight a few things that give school leaders ways to grow as an advocate of families. It's really wrapped up in all the things we've been saying. But I'm thinking of things like just counting as gold opportunities to hear each other, to be a good listener. I'm thinking of school leaders that may listen to this and say, I'm not comfortable in the arena of parenting, and who am I to give advice to parents? So any words for school leaders that might be feeling that?
Well, sure, and I often feel that. Okay, to be clear. But what I would say is that we don't have to have the answers. We just have to know people. And so I often don't know what to say, but I can listen and I can talk to other people who can help me. And I can send them to other people. Or would you like for me to go to a meeting with you? There are ways, I think, that we don't have to be the ultimate guide. We don't want to be the ultimate guide here, right? But what we want to be is the kind of persons, the kind of leaders who can hear and then help resolve or work with situations in a way that pulls others in. It doesn't have to be, I don't have to figure it out on my own. I usually feel like I can't. I need to talk to somebody. And what could we do there? And that's where pastors, I think, again, that idea of the pastors is I think, a huge thing for me. I often go to pastors with questions. Here's a situation. What would you say in your experience? I don't have to have the answers. I just have to have people on my team who can help me. And that team includes, I think, church leaders. So I would say that's at least one piece. The other thing that I think feels kind of vague, but I would say has permeated my experience, is that I'm in education partly because I see the value of great-grandchildren. It's the Psalm 78 idea that we are called in that psalm to nurture not only the people in front of us, but to keep in our minds, this is for the future. And so when we are going about our work, we're busy, we're teaching classes, and we're trying to solve problems, and we're putting Band-Aids on and cleaning up puke. It's all part of it. You can get lost in all that, and what do families have to do with anything here? But human flourishing comes through the foundation of a family. And I've always tried to, when I get in front of 7th and 8th graders, I try to think about their grandchildren. And so I don't do things for the short term. Try not to. I get caught up in that, of course, but I try to think about their grandchildren will be sitting here someday. What do I want that to be like? What needs to be in place? And that gives me some, I think the context, the framework to make decisions, to take the time to have a discussion, to have a conversation, because ultimately the health of our community rests on the people right in front of me. And at some time, that 2nd grader is actually going to be a preacher, be my preacher. And what do I want that to look like? And so I take the time, I think about these, I think not only about the student and their academics, but about their context and how, and in what they're learning, and how that will impact them and their grandchildren. And so that's been helpful for me, is just to try to live out the Psalm 78 idea of we're not doing this for short term. We're doing this for the long haul. And so it changes your conversations. It changes what you feel is important. When you see it as 50 years from now rather than in the moment. And we can't get away from the moment. And there's many decisions we'll make that are based on the moment. But I would encourage school leaders to really think about the way the approaches and the things that we're talking about, doing, communicating, training, developing, growing, discipling, all those things is more than just for that person in front of us. It's actually for the future of the church. And so I feel like when we keep that in our minds, it helps us think about families a little differently. It's not just about, little Bobby here making it in school. He's a human being who will be a part of a congregation, who will be a contributor, and he has a context. And how can we help in all those situations for him to have a flourishing life, to be a part of the story that God has created? So I know that's pretty vague, and that's not going to help every school leader here, but I do find that perspective frames and shapes what I do and how I do it. That I'm in it for the long haul. I'm thinking about it in a long haul way. That it's really important how this child experiences me right now, or how this child is functioning in their family. It matters. So I do think that at the end of the day, we can think about the value of building strong teams in schools, staff teams, strong, keeping our boards involved in the school where they know what's going on, let them be a part. We haven't talked much about school boards here, or really we haven't talked about school boards here. They're also a piece of this, right? They're part of school leadership where they have a sense for what's happening, where we communicate adequately. I just feel so much comes down to communication and a desire to see everyone really, truly flourish. Like where we see the potential and we work toward that potential, and we recognize the potential is always nestled into a context. It's always nestled into context. And that context for our students is a family. And families have a context in the church. And so it's a really beautiful picture of life together in a community.
Thank you, Gerald. And I'm just thinking for my part that if there's a lot of odds for families and parents, there's also tremendous grace, because God sees the potential of each person, has placed each person in those environments that you talked about. So I think our school leaders can have courage going into this, knowing that if it's the place of some of their greatest fear or uncertainty, it's also the place where God will meet them.
I think that's so true, and I want to encourage school leaders to step into situations with humility and grace, with a servant posture, the open-handed idea where I don't have all the answers, but can we at least talk here a little bit? And I think parents want that. I think school leaders ultimately want that. I think teachers want that. That the ability for us to be able to talk and to work together is such a beautiful picture, and I think it's so necessary, particularly with the cultural pressures that we face, and the fact that, as you've noted, the enemy is out to destroy, and he often does it through family, through destroying families. And so it's a gift and a privilege to be able to be a part of that piece of the kingdom, that part of a child's growing up, the training and discipleship. We don't take the role of the parent, but we are working on behalf of the parent to offer another perspective, to offer something that can be difficult for parents to offer, the academic side. It is always meant to be done with humility and grace. And if we do that, I think we can weather a lot of difficulty and trouble when we come at it with humility, grace.